Babies being born, then left to die. It sounds like a nightmare. Yet in Australia, a country hailed as progressive and forward-thinking, this is their reality. Babies being born and then discarded and left to die. Here with us to discuss this is Dr. Joanna Howe. Dr. Howe is a Professor of Law at the University of Adelaide and holds a Doctorate of Philosophy in Law from the University of Oxford. She is the recipient of the University of Adelaide's Women's Research Excellence Award. Dr. Howe is a mother of 5 children and uses her powerful presence on social media to advocate for unborn babies and expose the barbarity of abortion legislation in Australia. Jo, thank you so much for joining us on Uplift today. You have achieved incredible accomplishments throughout your life. Could you share with us what inspired you to get involved with pro-life advocacy and decide to take a stand and speak out on the issue of abortion?
Sure. So I actually used to be pro-choice. I'm not sure if you know that, Catherine.
No way.
In my early 20s,
Yes.
was a feminist at Sydney Uni studying economics law, and I just thought that women needed abortion in order to be able to achieve their career potential. And so I hadn't thought about it very deeply, but that was the position I took. And a friend challenged me when we were driving in a car. We were talking about the issue. It was actually a guy. So, there's that sort of idea that men aren't allowed to talk about this. They have to mind their own uterus, sort of thing. And I'm very grateful that he did do that, because he planted some seeds. Like, he asked some questions. Like, he just asked, how is it okay to kill a human being? And I was like, well, it's not a human being. And he was like, well, if it's not a human being, what is it? And, then he said, and if it's not alive, why is it growing? And he just asked me some questions I couldn't answer. And I then went on a long journey investigating the issue. I encountered what abortion is. And I think when I was for abortion, when I was pro-choice, I didn't really know what abortion was. And I didn't know that it killed a human being and how it did so violently. So, that was a big moment of change for me. I then went to Oxford and did my PhD, and then coming back to Australia and taking on my first sort of academic job as a lecturer at the University of Adelaide. I didn't think that I would be doing what I'm doing right now, which is, producing daily content on social media to educate people on the issue of abortion and to be calling it out as the biggest human rights issue of our time. So I guess I think for me, the turning point was in 2021. I live in South Australia, and our parliament was debating abortion up to birth, on demand, no restrictions. So abortion through all 40 weeks of pregnancy. And that was the wake-up call.
So, first of all, I can't even believe that we're having this conversation, but are babies being born alive after an abortion in Australia?
Yes, they are. And again, this is something a lot of people don't know about, and there's a lot of misinformation. So currently in Western Australia, there's a bill going before Parliament that allows abortion up to birth. And the health minister who's prosecuting the case for this bill, she has said publicly, there is no such thing as a failed abortion. Babies are not born alive and left to die after an abortion. And we've even had a Senate inquiry into the issue federally, and I presented evidence to that inquiry. And this is what we actually know to be the truth. What the health minister said was not true. Actually, in WA since 1998, 28 babies have been born alive and left to die without a legal right to care after an abortion. And nationally, there are 2 states that publicly release data. That's Victoria and Queensland. And we can see that in just those 2 states, every week a child is born alive after an abortion and does not have a legal right to care. So in Queensland, the abortion policy actually instructs doctors, do not provide life-sustaining treatment if a live birth occurs. We have some coroner's cases that expose what's happened. So there's a case about Jessica Jane, a little baby girl born alive after an abortion, placed on a metal kidney dish in an empty room for 80 minutes without any medical care given to her. She was a healthy baby with good AGPA scores, 515 grams when she was born. Another child at Westmead Hospital was dumped in a medical waste bin while still breathing and alive. So that, these are 2 really shocking coroner's cases. That happened in 1998, both of those cases. And yet 20 years on, we are still at this place. Just recently, I uncovered another story of baby Xantha, a little girl who, because she had Down syndrome, her parents decided to end her life through abortion. So they went into a Queensland hospital and she was 19 weeks old. She came out alive unexpectedly. The parents weren't informed. She was dumped in a hospital room without anybody in there, alone, for 7 minutes until she died. And to me, this is just shocking stuff. Like, you don't even need to be pro-life to be against leaving children to die. This should be something that every person is outraged by. One of the issues is people are covering it up. The Australian Senate inquiry covered up the issue. The health minister in WA is pretending it doesn't exist. And so it's really hard to get the word out there, which is why I'm on social media, why I've launched out on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and YouTube, to really try and educate people on the data, because I can do that using my research skills. And I feel like once you wake people up to this, then they can't unhear it. They can't unhear the story of a child left on a kidney dish or being dumped in a bin.
That's horrific. And do medical professionals not have a duty of care to protect these babies once they are born? So
you would think that, but these children aren't defined as patients. So that's the problem. So from the perspective of criminal law, you are a person from first breath. So, if I walk out of the hospital with my 1-day-old baby and I get mowed down by a drunk driver, that's 2 counts of murder, because there's me and my child who is 1 day old. But, a child that survives an abortion isn't seen as a child under the law. And so they fall through the cracks. And, there's a lot of medical professionals who are really deeply devastated by this. They've reached out to me. I've had lots reach out to me. But the problem is they will lose their job if they talk about it publicly. So I'm trying to find a way to share their stories. But, with 1 child every week, at the very least, being in this predicament in Australia, we know that this is a really big issue, and something we need to address.
It's massive. And some state that the notion of born alive babies after abortion is a complete myth. In fact, I believe even, was it the Western Australia's Minister for Health has labelled this and other similar concerns as a misinformation campaign by a Christian lobby. How do you respond to criticism such as this? Like, how do you cope with that when you have the facts?
So my role is really just to speak truth to these powerful people and to get the facts out there. So the West Australian reported on the comments of the health minister, who said it was misinformation to talk about babies being born alive after an abortion, when actually she was factually inaccurate. And the questions that have been asked on notice since 1998 in the Parliament, the parliamentary records show the answers, which show that 28 children have been born alive after an abortion in WA since 1998. I mean, it's the same health minister who just 2 weeks ago stood up in the Parliament and said that a baby in utero doesn't feel pain, they're not pain capable, and even after birth, they're not pain capable. Now, it's just anti-science. It's just not true. Like, it's almost laughable, sort of the things that they say, because they get away with it in Australia. We don't have a media that keeps them to account. So, there hasn't been anyone in WA who's been critiquing what the minister has said. I've had to do it on social media, and thankfully my content is reaching a lot of people. Like, in 3 months, I've reached 5 million people on social media, and that's a really incredible thing to have that reach. But it's really concerning that the mainstream media doesn't hold her to account for the lies that she has said.
Wow, I'm still in shock. Some people are so brazen to think that they can say these things and not be challenged. So you have the patience of a saint. So when a baby is born alive, do we know anything about the experience of that child, what that experience is like for the child, and how long do they live for? And where do these unwanted babies go when they are left to die?
There was a study in the Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology, so highly reputable journal, peer-reviewed article, and it looked at 241 late-term abortions where feticide wasn't given. So labour was induced, but the child wasn't killed first through digoxin or potassium chloride. In that study, they found that 50% of children, so actually over 50% of children, were born alive. So this is common. It's actually quite frequent that a child could be born alive, 1 in 2 in that study. And then the average survival time for children in that study was 32 minutes. One child survived for 467 minutes. So we know that we're not talking a matter of moments or seconds. It can be quite considerable. Like, I think you think about when you've been in pain or unwell, 32 minutes can feel like a lifetime. And for a little child that's been born, has been safe in utero, and then comes out into the world crying, cold, to have that experience where none of that child's comfort needs or emotional needs are being met, or physical needs, that, it's just appalling to think about that could be going on for 32 minutes, but even 267 minutes, which was one child in that study. I mean, we know the stories of abortion survivors like Melissa Oden, Tim, the Oldenburg baby in Germany. He was left on a metal kidney dish for over 7 hours. And the nurse that was part of the abortion eventually took pity on him and picked him up, wrapped him in a blanket, gave him some milk, and he went on to live and be adopted out. His parents wrote a book about him, his adopted parents. Yeah. So, we can see that this can go for a long time. There was a child, even just recently, the Senate inquiry in WA heard evidence of a child born alive for 18 hours without a right to medical care. So it's just horrific to think about. But then what happens to these babies? So some of these children, I will say, are held by the parents. So they're born alive and the parents hold them until they die. And that does happen for some of them. But the point is, it doesn't happen to all of them because there's no legal right to care. So like baby Xantha, just discarded in an empty room, that can happen. And I've had midwives and nurses reach out to me to say that these babies get dumped in the medical slop room. I think colloquially it's called the medical sort of waste room until they die. And it's really horrific that would be standard practice.
Yeah, it's seen as normal, the normalization of killing unborn babies. And culturally, how do you think, sorry, I'm still trying to process what you're telling me here as well, and I'm sure our UK viewers would find this quite difficult as well. So culturally, how do you think we have arrived at this moment? Vulnerable babies in need of care and protection are cruelly left to die, as you've mentioned, and abortion went from apparently safe, legal and rare to now abortion at the late stages and born babies discarded to die. How did we get here, Jo? How?
That's such a good question. I think we got here because too many of us were ignorant and silent, and we let a very powerful, moneyed up abortion industry to hijack the establishment, the media, the political parties, the narrative on the issue. And so, I think it is actually on you, it's on me, it's on the people listening. It's our job to call this out and to really be activated on the issue. Like, silence is not acceptable. Ignorance is not an excuse. This is the biggest human rights issue of our time. In Australia, this really began to turn in 1996 when an organisation called Emily's List was created. And the goal of Emily's List is to get pro-abortion women into the Labor Party and into Parliament. That's the sole goal originally of Emily's List. And so that organisation has single-handedly infiltrated our parliaments. And it hasn't just affected the Labor Party, it's affected the Liberal Party here, which is the equivalent of your Conservatives. It's affected the Greens Party. All of the parliament across our country, all of the parliaments across our country have been infected by Emily's List like a disease. And that's why in Australia, our parliaments are actually way more radical and ideologically pro-abortion than the Australian people. Just 2 weeks ago, there was an Ipsos poll of Australians, and it found that only 31% of Australians support abortion up to 20 weeks. So if only 31%, if a minority of Australians support abortion up to 20 weeks, and yet we have abortion up to birth in this country, you can imagine the fall in support as you approach 22 weeks, 23 weeks, gestational viability. So it's not popular, but the politicians have been able to prosecute a radical agenda because they've been let off the hook by the media. There's a lot of money behind this. And the Australian people like you and me, people in the UK, we are just not passionate or active enough on this issue, given how horrific it is.
Yeah, wise words. And so you are calling on the Federal Parliament to pass the Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill. What are the aims of this bill and what do you hope it would achieve?
So this bill is actually very simple. All it does is achieve birth equality in the law, so that if a child is born in Australia, they're entitled to equal treatment irrespective of the circumstances of their birth. So the exact provision in the bill says that a child born alive as a result of an abortion should be treated no different to a child born alive after any other pregnancy. So there's no additional obligation. It's just an obligation for equal treatment. And, really that should be non-controversial. And I think with the Australian people, it is But in the parliaments, because you've got politicians whose very seat, their very job depends on Emily's List and depends on the money from the abortion industry, they are compromised. And so, the report that was produced by Senator Marielle Smith as chair essentially whitewashed this issue. It was just replete with quotes, unsubstantiated opinions from the abortion industry and their activists and their lobbyists. And they didn't include any of the evidence, none of the data in terms of statistical data of children born alive, none of the coronial reports or media reports, none of the academic studies. So, that tells you that there's really something amiss here when a parliamentary inquiry doesn't even report the facts.
Wow, that's drastic. That's so drastic. I'm like so speechless. Like, I think my work here in the UK is tough. You've a really hard job over there, but keep going. Anyway, moving on to the next question. The society paints abortion as empowerment for women, and I know you'd mentioned you weren't always pro-life, you were pro-choice, and you probably had believed the lie too, that it's a necessity for a fair and equal world for women. How do you view the notion of abortion as a woman's right then?
Yes, this is such a good question, because we've been sold this lie that women need abortion in order to be equal to men. Because what abortion does is it neuters a woman's reproductive capacity or potential, because it just kills that child. So she's no longer pregnant. First wave feminists, the amazing women that got us the right to vote, people like Mary Lee in Australia, Elizabeth Nichols, they were all vehemently anti-abortion because they knew that abortion harms women. But the second wave of feminists in the 60s, they sold us out. They sold our generation of women out because they joined up with the abortion lobby, and they said for women to be free, they need abortion. The problem is, what this did is it let our culture, our world, our workplaces off the hook, because it essentially said to big corporations, you don't need to provide a family-friendly workplace, a workplace that empowers and enables women who might be mothers as well. It just said, well, actually, women can kill their children, so you don't need to do anything other than allow them some leave for abortion and some money for abortion. Like it didn't. The second wave of feminism, what it did is it said, women, in order to be equal to men, need to be like men, just by being able to be, reproductively neutral like men are. And yet women are different. We're equal but different. We have reproductive potential and capacity. And if we get pregnant, our bodies have within them a unique, distinct, unrepeatable, individual human being, that has never been seen before, will never be seen again. And that person is housed in our bodies. And so we are different. And abortion can't change or erase that fact. So I feel really passionate now about spreading a message that, first of all, it is possible to have children and have a career. I'm a mother of 5. I built my academic career while having my children. When I was at Oxford, I got pregnant with my first child. And, I remember going for dinner at Formal Hall at New College, and my husband brought the child to dinner, and he said, I know that small dogs aren't allowed. I don't know about children, and it was sort of like the culture almost was very kind of oppressive of having children. And I know in Australia, international students are really coerced into abortion. So I know, so first of all, I want to really proclaim loudly that we as women need to demand workplaces to accommodate our reproductive potential and capacity. Secondly, I really want to draw attention to the fact that most women choose abortion because of socioeconomic disadvantage or circumstances. So they're coerced into abortion because of insecure work or violence, or, the state, the government not supporting them, or the community in the way that they need. So I really want to call that out, that's really, really important as something we need to do, because funneling women into abortion actually sells them short, because we know the data that says it hurts women's emotional and mental health and has lifelong impacts. That data is out there. And we also know that abortion kills a human being. So for a woman to be complicit in that is not good for her. So it's not pro-woman to be pro-abortion, but we also do need a world and a workplace and a culture that supports women more. And just finally, sorry, long answer, but the other thing I also want to say is, like, I'm originally from India, and my country will have 6 million fewer girls by 2030 because of sex-selective abortions. And I grew up in a culture where my older brother was valued more than me. And I know in Victoria, there's a study by the University of Adelaide which shows that for every 125 boys being born, there's 100 girls. And it really should be an equivalent ratio. So there's something really wrong going on. There's 126 million girls missing worldwide because of sex selective abortion. So if you're a feminist and you're pro-woman, you have to care about the annihilation of girls in utero just because they're girls.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Like it's vital, really. You're not representing your side then. So I think yesterday, this was kind of a question I wanted to follow up with. Did the Western Australia Abortion Reform Bill, did they have an inquiry yesterday?
So where it's at is it's being debated in the upper house of the West Australian Parliament. So it sailed through the lower house, despite it being the most extreme abortion bill in the world. It sailed through. It's currently being debated in the upper house, actually, as we speak. But unfortunately, I really think the writing's on the wall, because our crop of politicians that we have in there, there's some incredible people like Kate Dowse from Labor, Nick Garran from Liberal, so from across the aisle, but they are the minority in that parliament, and it's going to be very difficult. So my job is really to raise people up, to care about the issue, to share content on social media, to talk about it with their friends, but also to enter the public square. So to go into politics and the media, the academy, and to start really turning the tide on this.
Can you share what happened to you as well when you decided to speak out against, abortion? You probably were feeling, oh gosh, like, will I lose a lot of friends or, family members? What actually happened to you in the end, though? Because I like this, what happened in the end, but please do share with our viewers.
Yes, so I had read a book about this issue by Dr. Debbie Garrett called Alarmist Gatekeeping. She wrote her PhD. She traces how everybody who's spoken out against abortion in Australia over 2 decades has been intimidated, shamed and bullied, and ultimately shut down. They stopped speaking out. And so I read that book before I posted my first reel to Instagram at Dr. Joanna Howe in July last year. So I was forewarned about what would happen, but it still in some ways didn't make it easier. So about a month or two after I started speaking out on social media, the president of the Australian Women's Lawyers Association, so a very powerful woman, she was trolling my employer's Twitter account, saying that it was a complete embarrassment that the university kept me on the books. And so it was almost like she was trying to get me sacked. Okay. And so I decided then that I was going to do a video calling her out. So I posted a video to Instagram and I said, how could she be doing this? It's anti-free speech. She's a lawyer. She should care about fundamental freedoms in a democracy. Anyway, she then wrote a comment demanding I take down my video, saying that she hadn't called for the university to sack me, just to stop supporting me. I then wrote a comment saying, well, by saying that the university should stop supporting me, what did you mean? That they shouldn't give me an office? Maybe they shouldn't be nice to me? Maybe I shouldn't be allowed in the tea room? Like, what does that actually mean? And she deleted her comment, and then she deleted a whole Instagram account. So it felt like a bit of a victory. But then the president of the SA Women's Lawyers Association was worried people would think it was her. So she said that unless you remove the reel, we're going to sue you. Again, I didn't back down, didn't remove the reel, and I did another video posting on her and calling her out. So that's sort of been my modus operandi, is if they go after me, I'm going to call them out and expose them for the bullies and intimidatory tactics that they have. The Advertiser, the main newspaper here, then had a big article, anti-abortion lecturer under fire, anti-abortion outcry. They emailed that to all their subscribers as the top story. And so, my face there, and it was intense, like to see that headline. But then to read the article and realize they'd totally made it up. Like, there was no outcry, because you'd think an outcry is like more than one person. And, they said students distressed. And yet only one anonymous former student was quoted in the article. And the timeline of what the student had said actually didn't add up to when I'd been out on social media. So I just think they made it up. And again, I went out on social media, I called out the Advertiser, I said this is a ridiculous attempt to bully and harass me. And 95% of the comments under the article ended up being on my side. The student union passed a motion defending me. The university stuck up for my academic freedom. The Law Society student president wrote a letter to the paper saying I'm a great lecturer. So, I think I've just learned you've got to fight. And just recently I had a big Australian media identity, Mia Freedman, probably the most powerful woman in the Australian media. She went after me. And again, I did a video calling her out. So I think you're probably getting the sense of what I'm doing here. It's that I'm not letting people, silence me and shut my voice down. But, it's thick and fast, because the complaints are coming in. And I sort of joked to my boss at work, you're going to need to set up a whole complaints department just to investigate the complaints about me. I went to WA to meet with the politicians and to share the results of my research. And Peter Foster wrote to my Vice Chancellor saying, he's an MP, saying, is she representing the university, sort of querying why I was there, as if to kind of try and get me in trouble with my boss. And, again, the university stuck up for my academic freedom, because that's fundamental to the idea of a university, that we would allow academics to explore ideas. But it's just that sort of thing, that constant harassment. But I am learning to reframe and realize that every time they attack, it's an opportunity to reach more people and to grow.
Exactly, that's well said. And you're doing great work, Jo, as well, so of course they're going to be rattled and the feathers will be ruffled, but it's like a pinch of salt for you anyway. I see your videos and you're well in for it. And now, so we will have many viewers here in the UK horrified at the notion of like babies born after botched abortions and left to die. Despite this horrifying reality, what words of action or hope would you give to pro-lifers who want to be a force for change here in the UK?
So I think in the UK, as I understand it, there's a very live debate about abortion up to birth. There are activists really trying to push through an abortion up to birth kind of reform. Is that correct, Catherine, that that's sort of going on at the moment?
Yeah, definitely. They want it on demand all the time, so they're trying to advocate for that too. I understand. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think it's really important that people in the UK realise that, in Australia, we've got a test of this. Like in 2008, that was the law that was passed in Victoria. And since then, every Australian state and territory has fallen to that same very extreme abortion up to birth law. And it's not pretty. They use this line, late-term abortion is rare, and it's only on babies that are going to die anyway, but it's just not true. In just 2 states, Victoria and Queensland, in a 10-year period, there's been nearly 5,000 children who have had their lives ended through late-term abortion. Those children should have been induced alive and been given every chance at survival, and yet they were killed first and then delivered dead. And in those 2 states, one every week, a child is born alive and left to die without a legal right to care. In Victoria, nearly 50% of late-term abortions are on physically healthy babies with physically healthy mums. And so if you allow abortion up to birth on demand for any reason, it means that you are literally trampling over the human rights of healthy babies, And so I really think it's important to get educated on this. So I would say that to the UK audience, please go to my website, drjoannahowe.com facts. And, /facts. And if you go to that, you will see that you can download a fact sheet on late-term abortion. It's fully referenced. I mean, my job is on the line, so I make 100% sure I get this stuff right. And, I think it's really important that people in the UK know what can happen if the UK introduces abortion up to birth. I think the second thing people can do is they can share content on social media. So there's excellent pro-life organisations in the UK. You can share my content, Dr. Joanna Howe, Live Action in the US, Lila Rose. There's lots of really inspirational people and organisations that are doing incredible things. So sharing content is a really low-key way of starting conversations. And I think finally then, we also need to get sort of activated in our communities and our networks talking about the issue, and also politically activated, writing to MPs, meeting with MPs, and, really getting involved in the issue itself. None of us can stay silent, as I said before, and I think all of us should never feel that our voice doesn't matter. I really believe we're on the right side of history and that this is going to turn around. And so I feel like that's on us for how quickly it happens and how many lives are saved through our action.
Well said, Jo. So thank you so much. Speaking with you today has been absolutely eye-opening, and thank you for all that you do in trying to expose the barbarity and fighting for unborn babies and mothers in Australia. So it was an absolute pleasure, Jo, having you on the show, and no doubt we'll be in touch and keep up the amazing work, and I just love your content. So absolutely thrilled to have met you as well. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of Uplift. Tune in again soon where we'll have more inspirational guests for you.